I am Heather Reynolds, 32 years old, standing at my father Walter's funeral while my world crumbles around me. Not just from grief, but from betrayal. My brother Brandon just informed me that I would receive nothing from Dad's estate because I was not his biological daughter. The coldness in his eyes when he said, "You were never really family anyway," shattered something inside me. But what Brandon never understood about me was my resilience. If you are watching this, please hit subscribe and let me know where you are tuning in from. This journey has an ending that neither Brandon nor I could have anticipated. My earliest memories of Walter Reynolds begin when I was 5 years old. My mother Diane had been a single mom since my biological father abandoned us when I was just 2. I barely remembered him. Mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat until she met Walter at the hospital where she worked as a receptionist. Walter had come in with a minor construction injury, and according to Mom, he spent more time trying to get her phone number than worrying about the stitches in his hand. Their courtship was swift but genuine. Walter would bring me little toys or books whenever he came to visit Mom. Unlike other men she had briefly dated, Walter always acknowledged me, got down to my level, and asked about my day. 6 months after they met, they were married in a small ceremony at the local park. I remember being the flower girl, feeling important in my pale blue dress. Walter never treated me like I was someone else's child. From day one, he called me his girl and took me fishing, taught me how to change a tire, and read me stories before bed. When I had nightmares, it was Walter who would come running, sitting by my bed until I fell back asleep. When I was 7, Brandon was born. I was excited to have a baby brother. But I also worried that Walter would now have his real child and might love me less. That fear proved completely unfounded. If anything, Walter went out of his way to make sure I never felt excluded or less important. "You were my first kid," he would tell me. "Nothing will ever change that." As the years passed, Walter built his construction business into one of the most successful in our county. Reynolds Construction was known for quality work and fair pricing. Walter had started with just himself and 2 employees, but by the time I was in high school, he employed over 50 people. We moved from our modest starter home to a beautiful house with a big yard and a pool. Walter never flaunted his success, though. He still drove the same pickup truck and wore the same style of worn jeans and flannel shirts. Brandon and I had very different relationships with our father. While Walter and I connected over books, fishing trips, and long talks about life, Brandon seemed more interested in the material aspects of being a Reynolds. By the time he was a teenager, Brandon was demanding expensive clothes, the latest gaming systems, and eventually, a sports car for his 16th birthday. Walter tried to instill his work ethic in Brandon, bringing him to job sites during summer breaks. But Brandon considered it a punishment rather than an opportunity to learn. I followed a different path. After college, I joined a marketing firm in the city, but stayed close to home. I would have Sunday dinners with Mom and Walter every week, help with household projects, and sometimes assist Walter with the business paperwork when his regular office manager was on vacation. Walter would beam with pride when introducing me to his clients or employees, saying, "This is my daughter Heather, the smartest one in the family." 3 years ago, our family was devastated when Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The disease moved quickly, and despite the best treatments money could buy, we lost her just 8 months after diagnosis. Walter was destroyed. They had been married for 27 years and were still as in love as newlyweds. During Mom's illness, I took a leave of absence from my job to help care for her. Brandon, who was in his final year of college, rarely came home, claiming his studies were too demanding. After Mom passed, I stayed with Walter, concerned about how deeply depressed he had become. I officially moved back home, switching to freelance work that I could do remotely. Brandon graduated and took a job in the city, visiting only on holidays or when he needed money. Over time, Walter began to heal. He threw himself back into his business and even started to enjoy small pleasures again, like his weekly fishing trips and classic movie nights with me. He often expressed how grateful he was that I had stayed, saying he didn't know how he would have coped otherwise. Then came the heart attack. It was sudden and massive. I found him collapsed in his workshop on a Sunday morning. The ambulance came quickly, but it was too late. Walter Reynolds, the only real father I had ever known, was gone at 62 years old. In those first few days after his death, I moved through the necessary arrangements in a fog of grief. I called Brandon, who expressed shock but said he was too busy to come home immediately to help with funeral preparations. "Just handle it," he told me. "You are there anyway." I arranged the funeral service at Walter's favorite church, selected the casket I knew he would have liked, and wrote the obituary highlighting his generosity and devotion to family and community. I contacted all his friends, business associates, and extended family. I chose photos for the memorial display and picked out the suit he would be buried in, all while feeling like my heart had been torn from my chest. The only time Brandon called during that week was to ask about the will and when it would be read. I was too numb with grief to recognize the warning signs of what was to come. The day of Walter's funeral dawned with an appropriately somber sky, clouds hanging low as if the weather itself was in mourning. The First Presbyterian Church, where Walter had attended services every Sunday, was filled to capacity. Construction workers in clean, pressed shirts sat alongside business owners and childhood friends. Walter had touched many lives. I stood at the entrance, greeting people and accepting condolences, searching each new arrival for Brandon's face. He had texted that morning saying he was on his way with his girlfriend Rebecca, whom I had only met once at Christmas. As the scheduled start time approached, I began to worry, but just as the minister was about to begin, Brandon slipped into the church with a beautiful blonde woman on his arm. Throughout the service, I struggled to maintain my composure as friends and colleagues shared stories about Walter's generosity, humor, and integrity. Brandon sat stoically, checking his watch occasionally. When invited to speak, he declined, so I alone represented our family, sharing through tears how Walter had been the foundation of our home and how deeply he would be missed. After the burial service, everyone gathered at Walter's house for the reception. I had spent the previous day preparing food and arranging for additional catering. The house filled with conversations and memories of Walter, some bringing smiles, others tears. Brandon mingled confidently, accepting condolences and speaking about my father's legacy to Walter's business associates, though he had shown little interest in that legacy while Walter was alive. Late in the afternoon, as the gathering was thinning out, Martin Goldstein, Walter's attorney and friend of 20 years, arrived. He apologized for missing the service, explaining that a family emergency had delayed him. He expressed his condolences and asked if we could speak privately for a moment before the official reading of the will scheduled for the following day. Brandon noticed Martin's arrival and quickly joined us in Walter's study. "I am glad you are here, Martin," Brandon said with unusual enthusiasm. "I was hoping we could go over some basics about the estate today." Martin looked uncomfortable but nodded. "I just wanted to give you both a general overview before tomorrow's formal reading. As you know, Walter was a meticulous planner." "Yes, he was," I agreed, thinking of how carefully my father approached everything from business contracts to vacation itineraries. Martin cleared his throat. "There have been some recent changes to Walter's will that you should be prepared for." Before he could continue, Brandon interrupted. "Changes that rightfully reflect the family bloodline, I believe." I turned to look at my brother, confused by his statement and the smug expression on his face. Martin shifted uncomfortably. "We can discuss all details tomorrow in my office, but yes, there were amendments made approximately 3 weeks ago." "What kind of amendments?" I asked, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Brandon answered before Martin could. Dad finally recognized what was fair. The business, the house, the investments, they go to me. His actual son. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked to Martin, hoping for contradiction, but found only discomfort in his expression. "Heather, Walter did leave you some personal items," Martin said weakly. "Personal items?" I repeated, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Brandon's face took on an expression I had never seen before, cold and triumphant. You are not entitled to the Reynolds estate. You are not even his real daughter. The room seemed to spin around me. Somewhere in the background, I heard Martin objecting to Brandon's tone, but the words were muffled by the roaring in my ears. Brandon, I managed to say, what are you talking about? Dad never made any distinction between us. Ever. That was before he really thought about it, Brandon replied. When he got sick after Mom died, we had some real talks, man to man. He realized that his legacy should go to his actual bloodline. It just makes sense. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her face showing concern. Is everything okay in here? Everything is fine, Brandon replied smoothly. Just explaining some family matters to Heather. I looked at this stranger wearing my brother's face. The brother who had shared a home with me for 18 years. The brother Walter had loved and tried so hard to guide. You did something, I said, the realization dawning. You manipulated him when he was grieving and vulnerable. Brandon's face hardened. I simply helped him see what was right. This house, this business. They belong to the Reynolds name. My name too, I whispered. Not really, Brandon replied dismissively. You were just Mom's baggage that Dad agreed to take on. Martin stood up abruptly. That is enough. This conversation is inappropriate right now. We will address everything formally tomorrow at 2 o'clock in my office. He turned to me, genuine sympathy in his eyes. Heather, I am sorry. Walter valued you enormously, please know that. As Martin left, the remaining guests sensed the tension and began making their own departures. I stood frozen in Walter's study, surrounded by his books and photographs, including many of me and him together throughout the years. Brandon had already left the room, playing the gracious host as he thanked people for coming. I remained there alone until the house emptied, trying to process how the worst day of my life had somehow become even more devastating. The next afternoon, I arrived at Martin Goldstein's downtown office 15 minutes early. The receptionist, an older woman named Patricia who had known our family for years, gave me a sympathetic look as she led me to the conference room. Can I get you some coffee or water, dear? She asked kindly. Just water, thank you, I replied, my throat feeling parched from a sleepless night. The conference room was elegant but impersonal, with leather chairs surrounding a large mahogany table. Family photos of the Goldsteins lined one wall, happy moments frozen in time that only intensified my sense of loss. I sat alone, turning my water glass slowly, waiting for the others to arrive. Brandon and Rebecca entered precisely at 2 o'clock, both dressed in expensive dark clothing that seemed more appropriate for a business merger than a will reading. Brandon nodded curtly in my direction, but made no attempt at conversation. Martin arrived moments later carrying a leather portfolio. Thank you all for coming, he said formally, taking his seat at the head of the table. The warmth he had shown our family over decades of friendship seemed dim today, replaced by professional detachment. Shall we begin? He opened the portfolio and removed several documents. I am here to execute the last will and testament of Walter James Reynolds as amended on May 12th of this year. 3 weeks before his death. Just as Brandon had said. Martin began reading the legal preamble, his voice taking on the monotone quality lawyers seemed to reserve for official documents. I barely listened until I heard my name. To my daughter, Heather Reynolds, I leave my collection of books, fishing equipment, and personal photographs. I also leave her the sum of $20,000. I blinked in disbelief. The books and fishing gear made sense. They represented our shared interests. But nothing else? No share in the business I had helped with? Nothing from the home I had grown up in and later helped maintain while caring for him? Martin continued, not meeting my eyes. To my son, Brandon Reynolds, I leave my house at 1452 Oak Lane, my business Reynolds Construction, including all assets and contracts, my vehicles, investments, and all remaining cash and property not otherwise designated. Brandon's expression remained neutral, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. The estate is valued at approximately $4.7 million, including the business, property, and investments, Martin concluded, then cleared his throat. Are there any questions? Yes, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. When exactly was this will changed, and what did the previous version specify? Martin looked uncomfortable. The previous will, dated March 10th of last year, divided the estate equally between you and Brandon, with the exception that Brandon would receive 51% ownership of the construction business. And my father changed this 3 weeks before his death? While he was still grieving Mom and having heart problems. I pressed. He appeared of sound mind when he made the changes. Martin replied stiffly. Was anyone with him when he came to make these changes? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Martin hesitated before responding. Brandon accompanied him to my office. I turned to look at my brother. What did you say to him? What did you do? Brandon shrugged. I did nothing except support Dad's decision. He realized that leaving the family business to someone who is not actually family made no sense. I am family. I am his daughter in every way that matters, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Not in the way that counts legally, Brandon replied coldly. He adopted you formally when he married Mom, sure, but that was just paperwork. Blood is different. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably beside him, but said nothing. Walter never once, in all the years I knew him, made that distinction, Martin interjected. Some of his professional detachment slipping. This change was unexpected. But legal, Brandon stated flatly. Yes, Martin confirmed reluctantly. Completely legal. I sat back in my chair, feeling hollow. The father I knew would never have done this willingly, not without manipulation during a vulnerable time. But how could I prove that? Is there anything else we need to discuss? Brandon asked, already gathering his things. You need to sign some documents, Martin replied. And Heather. We should arrange for you to collect your inherited items at your convenience. The meeting continued in a blur as papers were signed and arrangements were made. I moved and spoke automatically, as if watching myself from a distance. When everything was concluded, we all walked silently to the elevator. As the doors closed behind us, leaving the three of us alone in the small space, Brandon finally addressed me directly. I will be moving into the house this weekend. You should clear out your things by Friday. The casual cruelty of his words snapped me back to full awareness. You are kicking me out of my home? I just lost my father. It is my house now, Brandon replied flatly. And I lost him too. You barely visited him after Mom died, I said, anger finally breaking through my shock. I was the one who took care of him. I was the one who put my life on hold. That was your choice, Brandon said dismissively. Not my problem. When the elevator reached the lobby, I stopped before exiting. Looking directly at my brother, I made a decision. Fine. Take it all. Take every last penny and possession. But know this, Brandon. You are never to contact me again. Brandon actually laughed. As if I would. We are done here, Heather. Have a nice life. As he and Rebecca walked away, I stood frozen in the lobby, surrounded by strangers going about their business, unaware that my entire world had just collapsed for the second time in as many days. Finding an apartment proved more difficult than expected. With only $20,000 from my inheritance and minimal savings after taking time off to care for my parents, my options were limited. I finally settled on a small one-bedroom on the east side of town, a far cry from the spacious home I had shared with Walter. My few friends rallied around me. Jessica from college helped me move the belongings Brandon had so generously allowed me to take from my childhood home. Michael, a former colleague, connected me with freelance marketing projects to help rebuild my income. Their kindness was a lifeline during those dark first weeks. You should contest the will, Jessica urged as we unpacked boxes in my new kitchen. What Brandon did was clearly manipulation. With what money? I replied, placing mugs on a shelf. Good lawyers are expensive. And Brandon has access to all of Dad's resources now. Besides, legally everything appears proper. But morally it is outrageous, Jessica insisted. Walter would never have wanted this. The mention of what my father would have wanted sent a fresh wave of grief through me. Not just grief for his loss, but grief for what seemed like a final betrayal. Had he really valued me so little in the end? A month after moving into my apartment, I finally gathered the courage to go through the boxes containing the items I had inherited. The fishing gear brought a sad smile to my face. Walter and I had spent countless peaceful hours by the lake, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. I ran my fingers over his favorite rod, remembering how patiently he had taught me to cast when I was just a girl. Next came the books, hundreds of them. Walter had been an avid reader, particularly of history and biographies. Many of the volumes had notes in the margins in his neat handwriting. Reading these fragments of his thoughts felt like having small conversations with him again. At the bottom of one box, I found a leather journal I did not recognize. Opening it revealed Walter's distinctive handwriting, dates going back several years. He had kept a private journal, something I had never known. My hands trembled as I realized I was holding his personal thoughts. Should I read it? Would it be an invasion of his privacy? After a moment's hesitation, I decided that whatever insights it might provide were worth the moral ambiguity. I needed to understand what had happened in those final weeks. Starting from the most recent entries, I read backward through time. The final entry was dated just 2 days before his heart attack. I worry I have made a terrible mistake. Brandon seems changed since our meeting with Martin. The way he speaks to the workers, the plans he describes for after I am gone, none of it sits right with me. But is it too late to undo what has been done? Perhaps my backup plan will suffice. I need to speak with Martin again, privately. My heart raced as I continued reading earlier entries. Walter described increasing pressure from Brandon to change his will, citing family legacy and bloodlines. He wrote of arguments and Brandon's thinly veiled threats to cut contact if Walter did not do right by his only real son. Most revealing were Walter's reflections on his relationship with me. Heather has been my rock through Diane's illness and after. I could not have survived this grief without her. She is my daughter in every way that matters, regardless of biology. Brandon's insistence otherwise pains me deeply. What have I done wrong that he values blood over bond? Tears streamed down my face as I read entry after entry confirming what I had always believed. Walter had loved me as his true daughter. The changes to his will had come only after relentless pressure from Brandon during Walter's most vulnerable period. As I neared the end of the journal, a small key taped to one of the last pages caught my eye. Beneath it, Walter had written, "For Heather's future. Box 247, First National, Spring Street Branch." A safety deposit box. One that Brandon apparently knew nothing about. The next morning, I took the key and headed to First National Bank on Spring Street. The bank manager, Laura Simmons, greeted me warmly when I explained the situation. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, "we were actually expecting you. Mr. Reynolds left specific instructions that you would be coming eventually." Confused, I followed her to the safety deposit room. "I am not Mrs. Reynolds, just Ms. I never married." Laura smiled apologetically. "I apologize for the confusion. In our records, you are listed as Heather Reynolds, co-owner of the box with Walter Reynolds." This was news to me. "Co-owner? Since when?" "Since approximately 6 months ago," Laura replied, checking her computer. "Mr. Reynolds added you to the account in December. December, just after the holidays. Well before the will changes in May." When Laura left me alone with the safety deposit box, my hands trembled so badly I could barely insert the key. Inside, I found several folders, a USB drive, and a sealed envelope with my name on it in Walter's handwriting. I opened the letter first. "My dearest Heather, if you are reading this, I am gone. And things have likely unfolded as I feared they might. Brandon has been pressuring me to change my will in ways that go against everything I believe about family. His fixation on biology as the sole determinant of family has been deeply troubling. I want you to know that you have always been my daughter in my heart, from the moment I met you. The joy you brought to my life cannot be measured, and the woman you have become makes me prouder than I can express. Brandon's recent behavior has revealed a side of him I failed to correct as he grew up. Perhaps I indulged him too much or did not emphasize the right values. Whatever the cause, I needed to see if my fears about his character were justified. So I made a plan. I appeared to give him what he wanted with the will, but I took steps beforehand to protect you and ensure justice would prevail if my suspicions proved correct. The folders in this box contain legal documents showing that 3 months before changing my will, I transferred 60% ownership of Reynolds Construction to you through a separate trust. The company is already yours, regardless of what the will states. I also established a private trust in your name containing half of my liquid assets, approximately $1 million. The USB drive contains video recordings of conversations with Brandon where he made threats and attempted to manipulate me. I set up a camera in my study after becoming suspicious of his motives. These may help if legal challenges arise. I am sorry for the pain this situation has undoubtedly caused you. Know that I never stopped considering you my true daughter. And I never would have left you without the security you deserve. With all my love, Dad. I sat in the small bank room, tears flowing freely as the truth of what Walter had done sank in. He had not betrayed me. He had protected me while testing Brandon's character, apparently expecting the worst, but hoping for better. The folders contained exactly what Walter's letter promised. Legal documentation of the company transfer, trust paperwork, and banking information showing substantial assets already in my name. The company had never truly gone to Brandon through the will because it was not Walter's to give away at that point. It was already mine. Back in my apartment, I connected the USB drive to my computer and watched the videos Walter had recorded. The footage was clear and damning. In one video, Brandon stood in Walter's study, his voice raised. "It is a simple matter of biology, Dad," he insisted. "Heather is not a Reynolds. She does not deserve the company or the house. Those should go to your actual son, the one who carries your DNA. Your legacy." Walter's voice, sounding tired but firm, responded, "Family is more than DNA, Brandon. Heather has been my daughter since she was 5 years old. She has contributed to this family, to this business." "She contributed nothing to the business," Brandon scoffed. "Answering phones a few times when Sandra was on vacation is not contributing. She helped with the accounting. The client relationships, the organizational systems we use," Walter countered. "More importantly, she was here when you were not. When your mother was sick, when I needed support afterward." Brandon's expression turned calculating. "If you do not change the will, I will cut contact completely. You will never see any grandchildren I might have. The Reynolds name will end with me as far as you are concerned." The naked manipulation was difficult to watch. Other videos showed similar conversations, each one revealing Brandon's true character more clearly. The final video was different, showing Walter alone, speaking directly to the camera. "Heather, if you are watching this, then my concerns about Brandon were justified. I hope I am wrong. I hope he rises to be the man I tried to raise him to be. But if not, know that I have taken steps to protect you and the business I built. The employees at Reynolds Construction deserve better than what Brandon would give them. They have been loyal to me, and many have families depending on them. You understand this business better than Brandon ever bothered to learn, and you have the heart to run it with integrity. I have arranged everything legally through my attorneys. Not Martin, who has been compromised by his friendship with me, but through Amanda Winters at Clark and Associates. She has all the documentation and is expecting your call if things go as I fear they might. I love you, my daughter. Not my stepdaughter, not Diane's daughter, but my daughter. Never doubt that. I am sorry for any pain this situation causes, but I needed to know Brandon's true character before making my final arrangements. Forgive an old man's roundabout methods. But this seemed the only way to reveal the truth while protecting what matters most." The video ended, and I sat in stunned silence. Walter had known exactly what he was doing. The will change had been a test, one that Brandon had failed spectacularly. The next morning, I called Amanda Winters and arranged a meeting. She was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney in her 50s who greeted me with genuine sympathy. Walter spoke of you often and with great pride, she said after we had settled in her office. He was concerned about Brandon's increasingly entitled attitude and wanted to ensure the business would be in good hands. I am not sure I know how to run a construction company, I admitted. Amanda smiled. Walter thought otherwise. He mentioned your organizational skills, your people sense, and your integrity. He believed you would find your way. With some help from his management team, we spent the next 2 hours going over the legal documents. Everything was ironclad. The trust had been established months before the will change. The company transfer was complete and filed with all appropriate authorities, and the video evidence provided insurance against any claims of manipulation on my part. What about the house? I asked. That was my home for most of my life. Legally, that did transfer to Brandon through the will, Amanda confirmed. Walter felt he needed to make the deception convincing. However, given the evidence of Brandon's manipulation, we could potentially challenge that portion if you wish. I considered this for a moment. No. Let him have the house. This is not about getting everything back. This is about honoring Dad's wishes for the business and the employees who depend on it. Amanda nodded approvingly. You sound just like your father. Before leaving, I asked the question that had been nagging at me. Why did Dad not just tell me about this plan? He said you were never a good liar, Amanda replied with a small smile. He needed Brandon to believe he had won completely. Your genuine shock and hurt would be convincing because it was real. Walter hated causing you pain, even temporarily. But he felt it was necessary to expose the truth. Over the next week, Amanda and I prepared our strategy. We learned that in the 3 months since taking over, Brandon had already made significant changes to Reynolds Construction. He had fired 3 longtime employees, including Sandra, the office manager who had been with Walter for 15 years. He had canceled the company's generous health insurance policy in favor of a bare-bones alternative. Most concerning, he had begun negotiating to sell off parts of the business to competitors, apparently planning to cash out rather than continue Walter's legacy. The company's reputation was already suffering. 2 major clients had canceled contracts after experiencing Brandon's abrasive management style. Employees were unhappy, and rumors of a mass exodus were circulating. It was time to act. On a crisp Monday morning, Amanda and I arrived at Reynolds Construction headquarters. The modest 2-story building had housed the company for the past decade. After outgrowing its original location, walking through the front doors brought a wave of memories. From helping Walter with paperwork as a teenager to the company Christmas parties where he made sure every employee's family felt welcomed and appreciated. The receptionist, a new hire I did not recognize, looked up with a customer service smile that quickly turned to confusion. Can I help you? I am here to see Brandon Reynolds, I stated calmly. Do you have an appointment? She asked, glancing uncertainly at Amanda. He will want to see us, Amanda replied. Please tell him Heather Reynolds and Amanda Winters from Clark & Associates are here. The receptionist made the call, her expression growing more confused as she listened to Brandon's apparently agitated response. He, says he will be right out. We waited in the small lobby, which had changed in subtle ways since I had last visited. Walter's photos of job sites and team gatherings had been replaced with generic corporate artwork. The comfortable seating area where clients and workers had often gathered was now minimal and unwelcoming. Brandon burst through the door from the inner office, his face flushed with anger. What are you doing here? I thought we were clear about our arrangement. Perhaps we should discuss this in your office, Amanda suggested smoothly. Unless you prefer to have this conversation in front of your staff. Brandon glanced at the receptionist, who was failing to hide her interest in the unfolding drama. Fine. Follow me. He led us to what had been Walter's office, now redecorated with sleek, impersonal furniture. The fishing trophies and family photos were gone, replaced with modern art and a large portrait of Brandon shaking hands with the mayor. Make it quick, Brandon said, not offering us seats. I have an important meeting in 30 minutes. With Caldwell Construction. I asked. About selling off the residential division. Brandon's surprise was evident. How did you know about that? I make it my business to know what happens at my company, I replied evenly. Your company? Brandon scoffed. Did you not understand the will reading? Reynolds Construction belongs to me now. Amanda opened her briefcase and removed a folder. Actually, Mr. Reynolds, your sister is correct. Reynolds Construction legally belongs to her, and has for the past 6 months. She placed the documents on the desk. Brandon did not touch them, staring at us with growing confusion. What is this nonsense? Before changing his will, your father transferred 60% ownership of Reynolds Construction to Heather through a separate trust, Amanda explained professionally. The transfer was completed and filed with the state in December of last year, making her the majority owner regardless of the provisions in the will. Brandon's face paled, then reddened with rage. That is impossible. Dad would never have done that behind my back. He did it very deliberately, I said, pulling out the USB drive. He also recorded your conversations where you pressured and manipulated him into changing his will, threatening to cut contact, using his grief over Mom to wear him down, emphasizing biology over the family bonds he valued. You are lying, Brandon hissed, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. The documentation is all here, Amanda continued, opening the folder. Completely legal and binding. The company assets, contracts, and operations legally belong to Heather Reynolds as majority shareholder. Brandon snatched up the papers, scanning them with increasing agitation. This cannot be right. I will contest this. I will sue you both. You are welcome to try, Amanda replied calmly. However, in addition to these documents, we have video evidence of your manipulation of Walter during a period of grief and vulnerability. Evidence that might interest the probate court regarding the house and other assets as well. Brandon's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and fury. You set me up. You and Dad planned this together. No, I said quietly. Dad planned this alone because he suspected what you might do. I knew nothing until I found his journal after the funeral. He wanted to see your true character, Brandon. He gave you a chance to prove him wrong. And you failed spectacularly, Amanda added. A knock at the door interrupted us. A middle-aged man I recognized as Tom Barker, Walter's construction foreman for the past 15 years, poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but I heard Heather was here and wanted to say hello. His eyes widened when he saw me. It is true. We have missed you around here. Brandon slammed his hand on the desk. Get out, Tom. This is a private meeting. Tom looked taken aback, but stood his ground. Actually, I needed to talk to you anyway. 3 more guys quit this morning after you cut their hours. That makes 8 this month. We cannot finish the hospital project with the crew we have left. I said get out. Brandon shouted. Other employees had begun to gather in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. I saw many familiar faces, people who had worked with Walter for years, who had attended backyard barbecues at our house, whose children had received Christmas gifts from my father. I stepped forward. Tom, it is good to see you. There have been some developments you should know about. I turned to address the growing crowd in the hallway. In fact, everyone should hear this. Reynolds Construction is undergoing another change in management, effective immediately. Brandon tried to interrupt, but Amanda smoothly stepped between us, handing him another document. This is a formal notice that Heather Reynolds, as majority shareholder, is assuming the role of CEO of Reynolds Construction, effective today. Security will escort you from the premises, but you may return with your personal attorney to collect your belongings later this week. As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. I recognized Carl and Emilio, who had worked security at the company for years. Walter had paid for Emilio's citizenship classes and attended his swearing-in ceremony. This is outrageous. Brandon sputtered. You cannot do this. Actually, she can, Amanda replied. And she has. Mr. Diaz, Mr. Washington, please escort Mr. Reynolds from the building. Carl stepped forward apologetically. Sorry about this, Mr. Reynolds, but we need you to come with us now. The gathered employees parted as Brandon was led through them, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. "This is not over, Heather," he called back. "You will regret this." After he was gone, I faced the assembled staff, many looking confused or concerned. I know this is sudden and confusing. The short version is that my father transferred ownership of the company to me before he passed away, through a separate legal process from his will. Brandon was not aware of this arrangement. Murmurs spread through the group. Tom stepped forward. "Does this mean you are in charge now?" I nodded. "It does. And my first act is to reverse the changes Brandon has made. The health insurance policy will be reinstated immediately. There will be no selling off of divisions. And Sandra, if you are willing, I would like to offer you your job back as office manager." A woman in her 50s pushed through the crowd, tears in her eyes. "You bet I am willing. This place has not been the same without your father, and certainly not under Brandon." For the next hour, I spoke with the employees, addressing concerns and answering questions. The mood shifted from confusion to cautious optimism as people realized that Walter's company would continue as he had intended. Later that evening, alone in my apartment, my phone rang continuously with calls and texts from Brandon. I ignored them all until finally sending a single text. Any communication should go through Amanda Winters. The security codes to the house have not been changed. Then I turned off my phone, poured a glass of wine, and raised it in a silent toast to Walter. "You were right, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "About everything." In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into learning every aspect of Reynolds Construction. The business was solid at its core. Despite Brandon's brief mismanagement, the loyal employees who had stayed welcomed me warmly, and together we worked to rebuild what had been damaged. Sandra proved invaluable, patiently teaching me the administrative systems and introducing me to key clients. Tom helped me understand the construction side, taking me to active job sites and explaining processes my father had developed over decades. "Walter always said you had good business sense," Tom told me one afternoon as we surveyed a nearly completed office building. "He bragged about your marketing degree and how you helped organize his filing system." "I never thought I would be running a construction company," I admitted. "But it feels right somehow, continuing what he built." "He would be proud," Tom said simply. 3 months after taking over, I had settled into a routine. The company was stabilizing, with several former employees returning once word spread about the management change. We had secured 2 new major contracts, and morale was improving steadily. Then came the call I had been both expecting and dreading. "Brandon is asking to meet with you," Amanda informed me. "His attorney says he wants to discuss a settlement." The meeting was set for